All right, moving right along here. So it's a widely held belief that MDM programs are big, disruptive, risky, and prone to failure. While these things may have been true for some companies in the past, providing meaningful business value through the launch or maybe even a relaunch of an MDM program can be done in under 90 days. Yes, under 90 days is what I said. And if you take the right approach, right? If you take the right approach, you can realize a lot of value in a short amount of time. So up next is a session titled "How to Launch an MDM Program in 90 Days." And let's welcome Mr. Malcolm Hawker back to the stage to take us through the philosophy. Welcome back, Malcolm. Take it away.
Thank you, Reed. Much appreciated. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the final couple sessions of our inaugural Data Hero Summit. I'm so thrilled that everybody is here. If you've been the entire day and you've stayed through, cheers to you, kudos to you. I hope to add some value in my last session of the day here today. I'm thrilled that you could join us. Let me share my screen. If you just give me a minute. All right, hopefully everybody is now seeing a large title screen that's taking over my screen. Just a kind of a programming note here. In previous sessions today, I've been lucky enough to host some panels and to be fairly interactive with everybody who's attending. Just because I'm in presentation mode here, it's taken over my screen and I won't be able to interact as much in the chat of the session. But I will make sure to follow up with folks afterwards. If you ask any questions, we will most certainly follow up with those as well. As Reed said, I'm Malcolm Hawker. I'm the head of data strategy with Prophecy Software. It's my honor to be speaking today about how to launch an MDM in 90 days. How do I come about my knowledge here? So number one, previous to joining Prophecy about a year and a half ago, I was an analyst at Gartner. I was an MDM and governance analyst where I talk to CDOs and CIOs every day about what works and what doesn't work. Previous to that, I was an MDM practitioner. I've implemented MDM software. I've implemented a governance program. Over the last 20 years, I've spoke to people in literally every industry, every size of company, big and small, and I got a really good sense about what works and what doesn't work when it comes to MDM. Let's talk today about how to get an MDM program up and running in 90 days. It's absolutely positively doable. Trust me on this one. If you would have attended my presentation earlier today, you would have heard me talk about how MDM has transitioned from a nice to have to a must have. What we learned in the pandemic is that when there is a disruption to your business, when your supply chain gets plugged up, when your customer behaviors turn 90 degrees overnight and you have to respond to these changes, it requires agility and it requires speed. It requires you to know who your customers are, to have a firm grasp of your product catalog. It requires you to know who your employees are, and on and on and on. To deliver these levels of agility and speed, it's all about MDM. If your foundation, if your data is not solid, you can't respond to these ever-changing business needs. Again, MDM is a must-have. But let's be honest, Reed mentioned this already. We do have a little bit of a history here of MDM being big and disruptive and prone to failure. There are a lot of bear traps to avoid when we're talking about implementing an MDM program. We'll talk about some of those today. But thankfully, we're 20 years into an MDM journey here as an industry, and we do know what works. We do know best practices when it comes to getting up and running quickly. So I'm going to talk today about exactly how to do that. Let's put some shovels in the ground. Let's roll up our sleeves. Let's do this. By the way, do you like the photo? I love it. I actually took that. Isn't that cool? I live at the beach in Florida, so I was able to take that photo. Anyway, let's do this. I'm going to talk about the 4 things that you need to get right when it comes to implementing MDM in 90 days. We'll talk about each of these things in more detail, but they are maniacal focus on scope and approach, finding the right business partner, being agile and iterative. That's really important, and avoiding some of those classic pitfalls we'll talk more about. When it comes to keys to success, number 1, scope, and approach. You need to be maniacal about how you approach your scope and about how you use the right implementation style for MDM. I also took this photo. Sadly, these are 2 dogs that are no longer with me, but they were focused on that tennis ball. Alex and Penny were maniacally focused on that tennis ball anytime it came out. You need to be that black lab when it comes to managing for scope and choosing the right implementation style to launch an MDM in 90 days. This one's pretty simple when it comes to implementation style. I'm not going to go into the 4 kind of classic implementation styles that Gartner talks about. The way I see it, and I'm a ex-Gartner analyst, there's really only 2 styles: operational and analytical. If you want to launch in 90 days, you must focus on an analytical approach. It's that simple. Operational MDMs can drive a ton of value. Operational MDM, when you're pushing gold master records back into source systems like ERPs and CRMs and on, great value there, but they tend to be disruptive. They tend to require a lot of business rules when you're talking about things like survivorship and match rules and merge rules, and those things are going to take time to figure out. Moreover, those things require probably business process change. So if you want to launch in 90 days, you need to focus maniacally on an analytical, an analytical style of MDM. And really, what does that mean? It's a 360 of something. And honestly, folks, it doesn't even really need to drive value. It doesn't even need to be a 360. It could be more like a 280 or maybe even a 180. Which brings us to kind of to scope number 2 here, to things you need to focus on to limit your scope. You don't need to break every data silo yet. For a phase 1 implementation of MDM, break 2 or 3 silos. The first time I did this with any level of success, I failed the first 2 or 3 times that I did it. But the first time that I ever did it with any level of success, I broke 2 silos. I broke the link between CRM and ERP. I found a way to connect those 2 together. There will most certainly be a Pareto principle at play here. 80% of the value is going to come from 20% of the data and 20% of the systems. Another thing here is that you absolutely positively need to tie your scope to a defined business outcome. I'll say it again, a well-defined business outcome, meaning a KPI, meaning a process, something like cross-sell, upsell, quote to cash, procure to pay. I could go on. Those are business processes. Notice, folks, I'm not saying domain. Do not focus your scope on a domain. It is a false limitation of scope that will be impossible to measure the success of. Your customers, your business partners are managed and measured through KPIs. They're not measured in domains. So this leads us to number 3 point here about how to get your scope right, how to get your approach right. You need to build a business case. I would say, honestly, this is not optional. You need this business case. Even if you've been given money to go buy software or hire people, you need a business case. Because what happens if you get a new CTO? What happens if you get a new CFO? You need to be able to track the success of your MDM initiative. Moreover, that business case is going to help you limit your scope. It's going to help you have an informed conversation with your business stakeholders about what's in and what's out. When you say, hey, I'm going to increase your cross-sell rate, I'm going to lower your risk of fraud, I'm going to increase your sales, those are valid business outcomes that you can put a scope around. It's impossible to put a scope around a single version of the truth, or elimination of null fields, or reducing duplicate records. Notice the things I was talking about earlier, those are valid business outcomes. They can be measured. They've got KPIs. That's where you need to be focused from a scope perspective, not on the things that we usually associate with data management measures like reduction of like null fields and duplicate records and on and on. So your scope here should be limited by those KPIs. Pick 1 or 2, no more. That's how you limit your scope. Do not focus on a domain, focus on a KPI, focus on a business process, focus on analytical MDM. Key to success, numero dos. Number 2. The number 2 key to success here is to find the right people to partner with in the organization. Yes, this is about getting executive support. You need executive buy-in. You do need executive buy-in, but you also need to be pragmatic. You need to go where you are wanted. If you want to launch an MDM quickly, you need to reduce the friction in your organization around the proposition of MDM. I suspect what you will find when you have conversations around those business outcomes that you need to have, you'll find some business stakeholders are really excited about the prospect of solving those problems, and others will be like, nah, I'm good. We got this. It's that latter group that you don't really need to work with, unless, of course, you're being specifically instructed to do so. But that's where that business case comes in. You're going to be able to say to your CEO, your CFO, your CIO, we got a business case that says we can drive some real substantial change here, and I got a partner that wants to work with me. That's where you need to be focused. You need to find the right partner. Be careful about kind of taking just a purely top-down approach here. You need to find those functional leaders. At most organizations, this would be a VP, maybe a senior director, maybe even a senior manager if you're an extremely large company. You need to find those functional leaders, partner with them, get them excited. Once you get that functional leader excited and bought into a high-level business case, then go back to the executives. Then go back to the executives and say, we have a business case, we've got alignment, we've got agreement that we should be working on this. Hey, CFO, CEO, CIO, are you okay with this as a phase 1 MDM initiative? The first thing they will do is look to that functional leader and say, are you okay with this? The functional leader will say, yep, thumbs up, let's go. All else being equal, if you can, avoid a scope that crosses functions, but I suspect you won't be able to. I suspect the greatest value and the problems will probably be in the gaps in functions between a sales and a finance. That was my example, between CRM and an ERP. Maybe they're between different levels of function within an ERP. Maybe they're between procurement and manufacturing. The point here is that chances are you probably won't be able to avoid crossing functions, but if you can, all else being equal, focus on maybe within a CRM system even better. But don't be afraid of a cross-functional use case here, because if you are focused on that KPI, if you're focused on that business outcome, you will drive value for the organization. But again, the key point here is get those functional leaders excited first and get a business case, get them to align to the business case, then go to top management. Where top management is concerned, you need to be managing those expectations, right? Get the functional leaders aligned, then get the top managers aligned. Don't assume just because somebody has said, a CEO, a CIO has said, okay, go do this. And just because they've aligned to this doesn't mean the functional leaders will align. I've seen this over and over and over again. Often, if you go and ask a CEO or CIO or CFO, hey, what are our top priorities? Well, our top priority is X, Y, Z. And then you go to have that conversation with the functional leader of XYZ, and the functional leader is like, yeah, no, we're good. I don't need this. I don't want it. Even when that senior executive has said, we should probably be focused here, if that functional leader is not supportive, doesn't want to do it, I wouldn't try to push the boulder up that hill. I'd go back, again, have other conversations with functional leaders, get the business case, then go back to senior leadership. Chances are senior leadership is going to say, okay, this sounds good. If we've proven there's a business case here, let's do it. But just don't assume, just because you've got senior leaders saying A or B or C, don't assume that those functional leaders are always going to align, because it's always about incentives. And often in large organizations, those incentives don't align. They're supposed to, but sometimes they don't. All right, let's talk a little bit more about kind of, the operating model needed to do this. And the operating model needed to do this, including the strategic model. So there's a strategic model here and an operating model. Is all about agility. It's all about agility. I used to hear when I was a Gartner analyst, hey, I need a data strategy first, right? I need to spend the next year doing a data strategy, then we'll get to MDM. You do need a data strategy, but it doesn't have to be perfect. Do you need an MDM strategy? Yes, you do. But again, it doesn't have to be perfect. The right MDM strategy for a phase 1 initiative of MDM, for a V1, for phase 1, getting launched in 90 days, the right MDM strategy is the thing that enables that 90-day launch. So let's talk about that a little bit more. This is kind of what I would call more of my MDM strategy and operating model. The outside of the wheel here really kind of speaks to your high-level strategy. Things like your data and governance maturity, things like the high-level kind of business plan, the business strategy writ large, things like your culture and your overall operating model within the organization. These things you will not change in the short term. If you're a VP, senior vice president, leader of data and analytics, and you think you need to go and fix your data culture before you can implement MDM, you're not going to launch in 90 days, and you're certainly not going to fix your culture in 90 days. You can't do it. You need to take those things on the outside of the ring here as a given and find a way to work around them. If your culture is one that is kind of opposed to centralization, well, find a functional leader that is okay with it. Find a business process that better aligns itself towards more centralization. Work around your limitations from a governance perspective. Work around your limitations from an overall data and analytics maturity perspective. Because if you start on those things and you focus on them, months and months and months could go by and you're not going to launch in 90 days. So the inner ring here is really kind of where the rubber hits the road. This is your MDM strategy and operating model. Each of these pie pieces are the things you need to get right to launch an MDM in 90 days, and not just 90 days. I would argue kind of writ large, going beyond. But when it comes to that strategy, do you need a strategy for MDM? Yes. There's two things you need to keep in mind. One is that scope, that short-term priority, short-term need, short-term scope. The other thing you need to keep in mind is you should have, we'll talk about this a little bit later about your team, you should have a technical architect who can make sure that what you're doing and what you're building does not sacrifice anything you want to do in the longer run. There is a balancing act here, right? You do need to have a flexible, scalable, extensible architecture. You've heard a lot today about the data fabric. I'm pretty excited there. But beyond the data fabric, there is a broader strategy discussion here to be had about your technology strategy. But also, how do I do the short term? How do I enable those 1 to 2 key business KPIs? What are the measures we're going to use to know whether we're delivering value or not? Again, that business case is totally and completely key. You need to have one. Pardon me, my throat is starting to go after a long day of talking. Lots of talking today. So that's an MVP approach to strategy. Focus on what you need to do to deliver in 90 days, deliver value in 90 days. So when it comes to agility, another part of your MDM operating model here is going to be what I'm calling MDM product management, the overall care and feeding of your MDM, let's call them data products, because I'm a big believer in product management. I'm a big believer in understanding those 1 to 2 needs intimately. I'm a big believer in understanding what drives those business KPIs, quantifying the link between better data and those KPIs, building rock solid relationships with your customers. Do not assume data literacy is your biggest roadblock. It's not. Your bigger roadblock is more than likely business literacy. And that's what you as a data product manager need to do. You need to go out there and understand how your business is leveraging master data to deliver value. Build a short-term roadmap. So your product manager, yes, will be absolutely focused on the next 90 days, but he or she will also be focused on the first year roadmap and the 3 or 4 releases that are going to get you significant value in the first couple of iterations around MDM. But that roadmap is key. This does get back to management expectations. They need to know what's coming and when are they going to get a piece of this overall solution. But I'm a huge believer in product management when applied to data management, and MDM is no different. Agility here is really all about taking kind of an MVP approach, the minimum viable MDM, the minimum viable master data product that is needed to deliver value, those 1 or 2 KPIs that I was talking about. Do that in 90 days, and then do it again in the next 90, and then the next 90 after that, and on and on. These wheels will start to spin, figuratively speaking, of course. These wheels will start to spin. And the more you successfully execute, the more you implement in the blue ring in the middle, the better you'll get on the green ring on the outside. The better you get around maturity. You'll build your maturity by doing, not by studying, but by doing. You will address some of the kind of operational gaps from a strategy level that you may have in your organization around data culture or data maturity. You'll get better at MDM. You'll be able to promote your success and scream it from the mountaintops, and people will start to ask for your help instead of you trying to force it. So it's all about iterating. It's all about starting small. It's all about creating value bit by bit by bit over time. Governance, my goodness, I used to hear about this one all the time. I would get calls at Gartner and my clients would say, Malcolm, do I need to do governance first? I think I need governance first because I can't get to MDM without governance. And arguably, there's a little bit of truth there because MDM does require business rules. You need to codify business rules into MDM software that you're probably going to be using. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But those business rules are governance policies. But the thing you need to be focused on here is to not fall in the trap of assuming you need to figure out all aspects of your governance framework. If you did that, it's going to take you a couple of years. Figure out the minimum amount of governance needed to deliver on those 1 or 2 KPIs. Probably you'll be asking questions about how do I define a customer and how do I define a customer relationship and how do I measure my data quality when it comes to customer records. Those are 3 or 4 questions you can answer, but you don't have to answer every question about every governance initiative. Building out a data governance framework will take time. Focus on the minimum amount of governance needed to deliver on those 1 to 2 KPIs. Also have that business case in your back pocket. This will help you understand, how do I quantify the value of a governance initiative? Let's talk about the team. This isn't a one size fits all, quite obviously, guys. I mean, this mileage will vary. But when we're talking about getting an MDM program off the ground, in a perfect world, which we know is not perfect, sadly, in a perfect world, data governance would be managed by the business. The business would be defining all of the business rules. The business would be defining and doing all the stewardship. It would be leading a governance council. It would be doing all of the governance blocking and tackling we need them to do in a perfect world. But often what I've seen is the business is reluctant to do all those things until we show them value. I can't tell you how many times I've seen governance initiatives stood up and we're talking about process and we're doing analysis and we're talking about data definitions and we're talking about all this stuff. 6 months goes by, you have very little to show for your work, and most everybody has given up on the Data Governance Council. They don't go to the meetings anymore because you didn't show value. So in the spirit of being pragmatic, what I tell my clients is, hey, maybe in the short term, maybe for that first 3 to 6 months in the first couple of revs of an MDM program, maybe IT needs to take a little bit of a disproportionate ownership share over governance tasks that ultimately you will want to transition to the business, right? So maybe in the short term, it's okay for IT to be doing stewardship. Maybe it's okay for the IT group to be leading the governance discussions. Yes, you still need input from business stakeholders. Of course you do. But that's another great thing about taking an MVP approach. 1 or 2 KPIs is that the number of seats around that table is going to be limited. You're not going to have people from 15 different departments of the business talking about those KPIs because they're probably only going to be relevant to 1 or 2 departments. And it's going to limit the number of people you have in those meetings. From a team perspective, there's really kind of 4 key roles you need to be thinking about here. You need a program lead. This is the kind of the spokesperson of an MDM program within the organization. The joke I tell is they need to be 1/2 IT, 1/2 business, and 1/2 sales. Yes, because this does involve sales and marketing. It involves storytelling and creating a narrative. You need a product manager. And I call it a product manager by design. We need product management in the world of data and analytics. We need it. You need an architect. I already talked about this before. And you're going to need system administrators and data stewards. Maybe that is one person. Just an FYI, these don't have to be FTEs, but even in the smaller companies, I would say that the program lead most certainly, absolutely positively is an FTE. Maybe the product manager, but the other 2 can most certainly be shared resources. From an MDM technology perspective, do you need software? Technically you don't, but probably you do. It's all about scale. Getting back to that first slide that I showed, if you really want to scale this, if you want to scale your MDM program, you're going to need some technology. That's what MDM software is really, really good at. It allows you to scale. The whole reason, one of the big reasons I'm sure you're looking at MDM in the first place is how to get away from Excel. And continuing to bet on Excel, probably not the right long-term approach here. All right, our last section here in our last few minutes is how to avoid some of the key MDM pitfalls. Well, 1, 90% of MDM software is deployed, and 90% of MDM kind of programs are supported by consultants. So this is not an indictment of consultants. I love my consulting brethren. I've hired every imaginable type of consultant, and we depend on them intimately. We depend on them for best practices. We depend on them for staff augmentation. We depend on them to help craft our roadmap. Consultants will play an important part of your team, more than likely, because MDM resources are hard to find. However, what you need to do is to put a corral and a fence around the consultants. You manage your scope. Figure out what one of those 1 or 2 KPIs are, those business outcomes, right? Figure out what those things are, get a draft business case together, then engage the consultants. Avoid the pitfall of bringing in a consultant to do a time and materials engagement where you basically just say, hey, we need to deploy MDM, go figure it out. That is exactly what you want to avoid. Instead, what you want to do is to say, hey, consultants, we are doing MDM to drive this outcome for the business. We want a 5% increase in our cross-sell upsell rate, and we want to utilize MDM to do it. And we want your help. Can you craft an SOW around that? Yep. Sure we can. But that is a drastically different engagement than, yeah, we're going to spend the next 6 months talking to everybody conceivably on the planet about what they want. Because what'll end up happening is that all of a sudden, now you've got 20 people at the table saying they all want something. Impossible to manage for scope. You manage the scope. All else being equal, don't put MDM in a backseat. All else being equal, MDM should stand on its own merits. If you absolutely positively have to kind of append MDM as a part of something else, maybe an ERP migration or an ERP consolidation or a broader digital transformation, chances are pretty good you're not going to launch in 90 days, particularly if it's tied to an ERP initiative. Those things don't launch in 90 days. They just don't. Same thing with a broader digital transformation. Have MDM stand on its own. That business case is key. Yes, can you believe what you're reading on the screen right now? Like, this is like, what do you mean? Yes, avoid data cleanups. They're costly. They're difficult to quantify, and they will get in your way if you are aiming for a 90-day launch. I would even argue your first 2 or 3 revs or your first 2 or 3 phases of MDM shouldn't even be talking about data cleanups. Why? Well, 1, they never finish. 2 is that you don't need to clean up your data to deliver value. You don't. You can, what I call, price in the cost of low quality data into that business case. Can you deliver 60 or 70% of the solution and still deliver material outcomes to your business partners? Yes, you can. As long as you are managing expectations, like I mentioned before, you can set the expectation that, hey, there's still going to be some bad data here. We're still going to see 2 or 3 versions of Acme Incorporated that maybe we can't link to some sort of master record, that we cannot aggregate together as a part of that analytical view, that 360 view of our customers. There's going to be outliers. Set that expectation. But if you build a business case that says we're going to drive $1 million of revenue, your business partners are going to say, yeah, that's okay. I can live with it. I can live with it. I can live with that bad data. Maybe when you get to an operational MDM, you do need to start talking about cleaning up data, but you don't need it for an analytical style of MDM. So with that, are you ready to launch an MDM program in the next 90 days? I hope you are. I'm here to help. If we're not connected on LinkedIn already, please connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm talking about these issues every day out on LinkedIn. I'm providing best practices, tips, tricks, insights, bear traps to avoid, you name it. Please let's connect on LinkedIn. I have a podcast every 2 weeks, CDO Matter podcast, where we talk about these very things. I'm out there talking. So if you see the small print here about all the cities that I'm going to be in over the next 6 to 8 weeks, I would love to meet you in person and have conversations in more depth around how to get an MDM program up quickly. Next up, awesome session with some of the smartest people I've ever met. Stay tuned for a conversation with Holly Kelly, Eric Zweifel of Microsoft. We're going to talk a little bit more about the data fabric. Can't tell you how thrilled we are to have you here at the inaugural Data Hero Summit, end of a long day. Thank you so much for attending. And I hope to see everybody at again very soon at our next Data Hero Summit. Bye all.